Yeah, lovely to meet you all. We will be working together till I believe it's 4:30 this afternoon. I'll build a couple of breaks into that. I find with Zoom two, oh, excuse me, two short breaks are better than one long one. Um, this is not going to be a session where I'm just sitting and telling you stuff. It's going to be fairly interactive. There's going to be group work. Because it's interactive, I'd like people to have their cameras on, please, unless you absolutely can't. It's much, much better if people can have their cameras on. Brilliant. Thank you. That's fantastic. It makes so much difference. We get a much richer communication from that. And in fact, we don't do it in this workshop, but when I work with my master's students, I spend a lot of time, or in the next workshop we're doing, we'll be looking at rich and lean media and the way that we get so little communication comes from the words themselves. Only 7% of communication, or the meaning from communication, is from the words. The rest, in any sort of emotive communication, is a combination of facial expression, tone of voice. So having your cameras on really, really helps. Um, so, but let's not talk about things which we're not going to be looking at this afternoon. Let's look at things that we are going to be looking at. And yeah, so just, can everyone see my slides? Okay,
Yes. Yeah.
fantastic. So, um, I'm gonna start off by reminding you of the first part of the portfolio that you're going to be working on. Um, and that's because I'm essentially structuring this afternoon session around that. Okay. Um, so you will see that you are writing 1,250 words, which you will find is not very many words at all when you actually come to start putting this together. And you're going to be looking at the organization itself and where you sit within that, what the role of internal communication in your organization is based on your observations and your reading. And then, you know, how is it that internal comms builds and supports employees' understanding? And what's your part in that process? Now, I know you know this because you've looked at the assessment brief already. What we're going to be doing this afternoon is starting off with a little bit of group work, thinking about, well, what is internal communication? Because that's a really good place to start. And it's always wise to have a definition when you're talking about something in an academic piece of writing. We start by talking about, sort of what it is that we are talking about. And then we'll go on to look at, well, okay, so, you know, what is internal communication um, contributing? What's the value of internal communication in my specific organization? And there'll be similarities between all of you, but there'll be differences as well, because the role of internal communication will really differ according to the specific needs of an organization, the specific culture and strategy of an organization. So we'll just have a little bit of a look at that. And then we'll go on to look at, well, sort of what is it that we actually do? Um, and as part of that, we'll take a bit of a deep dive into looking at employee engagement and what that is and how you can be contributing to that. And then we'll sort of at the end of that, we'll take a bit of a look at where it is that we sit physically in the organisation. And we'll also look at how it is you help people in the organisation understand about the external factors that are impacting on the organisation, because that's a really important role within internal communication, of helping people understand the environment that they're operating in and that the organisation's operating in, because that way you can be helping to sow the seeds for change and for acceptance of change. So that's a bit about what we're going to be doing. Well, also, I'll be giving you various references as we go. And this is really important because, as you know, this is an academic qualification. And so when you're producing a sort of a 1200 word piece of work, what you want to do is not just, this is what I think. You know, great to know what you think, but actually you could do that before you ever started doing the qualification. You know that you've got certain views already, but it's really reading round, understanding, thinking about, well, what have others said? How can I be building that into my argument that's going to make the difference between scraping a pass and actually doing well? So I'll make sure that I'm building that principle in as we go. Any questions about what we're going to be covering before I kick off? Okay. Oh, one other thing I probably should do is, Stella's already said that I'm currently the course masters in internal communication management. Just to give you a bit of an idea who it is that's leading the session this afternoon, I've worked in communication all my working life, both internal and in my early career, a lot of external and issues management stuff. I've worked in-house in the utilities sector and in pharma, so I know what it's like to be in-house and the challenges you face. Then I moved into training and consultancy, got very interested in particular in employee voice, and I then did a lot of work, both pan-organisational research across a range of organisations for like a think tank, but also I together with a colleague started up a consultancy, and we were really looking at employee voice in organisations. So I've not just got an academic perspective, is what I'm saying. I've kind of looked at internal communication from all angles, really. So that's a bit about me. But the most important thing is to actually get going. So I said there would be a fair amount of group work this afternoon. I've got about 4 different exercises that we're going to be doing. And because definitions are important when it comes to academic work, you need to make sure that what you're talking about is the same thing as what your reader is anticipating and thinking, because otherwise you'll end up with all sorts of misunderstandings. So I'm going to pop you into breakout rooms, and I'm going to give you 10 minutes to create a definition of internal communication, please. And what I'd like by the end of that 10 minutes is for one person for each group to have captured what your definition is, and then we'll have a look at the various things that we have come up with. Okay, everyone got the task? Any questions about the task? Okay, no. In that case, let me just see where breakout rooms have hidden themselves. So I am going to, I think we will do 3 groups. So we've got 4 to 5 people in each group, so a decent number of people. Okay, so 10 minutes, so I'll be getting you back at about 25 past. And if one person can be ready to speak at that point, and if you've got your definition done by then, please. Thank you very much. Oh, by the way, if you can see, you can't quite see him. You might see a kitten pop up at some point. I'm having to keep my kitten with me at the moment because I've got builders in another part of the house. So excuse me if he starts to join in the session, which is quite possible. Okay. See you in 10. If I can say to everyone as well, can we make it a joint responsibility to remind me when we restart a session each time to start recording again? Because I've been known to forget, though I'm going to do my best to be remembering. Okay. So I think we're all back. And so, I tell you what, the easiest thing's going to be is if all the person who's feeding back for all 3 groups actually just pops your definition into the chat function, and then we can all compare what the different definitions are.
Just whilst that's happening, Liz, I don't know whether it's just me, but are you able, your volume is a little bit lower.
Oh,
Maybe it's me.
No, it is a bit low, Liz. It's gone all together now.
audio settings, output volume. My output volume's on maximum.
Don't worry if not, it's fine.
Yeah. What I'll try and do is that better in terms of me projecting a bit more?
That's okay, but don't
It's all right. I've got an acting
shout.
background. I'm quite capable of projecting loud if I need to.
Thank you. Love it.
Okay, so it's like waiting on tenterhooks. Right, so there's one group, Jordan's group. Thank you, Jordan.
Sorry, I couldn't type fast enough.
Don't worry.
I just put mine in there, but I don't know if you can see it.
Oh, hold on. There's one above.
Yeah.
Oh, excellent. Right, and I think we've got one more to come. Okay, great. So we've got all 3. Right, so what we're going to do is have a look, and what I'd like you to do is try and just analyze what are the similarities between these and where are any differences. Okay, and also if you have any questions for understanding. Okay, because we'll then go back to the original group for that. So just a couple of minutes having a look.
Jordan, you found the right words that I was trying to say actually with aligning to the business values. I completely forgot that word. You can tell it's a Monday already. But
I
yeah,
feel like looking at all of them, we've all sort of gone with alignment. So
yeah,
maybe that's the word.
yeah.
Yeah, so what are the similarities? Let's So alignment is definitely a similarity across them. What
We've all
else?
said being the voice as well. We've all used the word, we're the voice of
Yeah,
reason, the voice of the business.
yeah, though it's different, isn't it? So we've got Lily's group is the voice of the business. Jordan's group is the voice of reason. Are those two necessarily the same?
I don't agree. I don't think they are. I think a lot of the time, as internal comms, you get a view from the people and the business, so it's being the voice of reason to both sides.
Right.
And
Yeah,
I think that's where
I like that.
bringing
I
people
like that.
together comes into it.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. And yeah. Yeah, I'll try and hold my powder dry until we've all had a chance to speak. Anything else that's the same? There's definitely Jordan's group and Steph's group, that theme of connection is very strong in both of these, isn't it?
Yeah, so I think from my understanding is if people feel connected to the business, connected to the vision, their mission, their goals, they're they'll work harder, they'll feel more motivated because they're part of the I suppose they feel like they're part of the company and they're all working towards a similar goal. Whereas if you lose that connection, you lose that motivation.
Yeah.
So I
So
think
there's connection from the perspective of I see where I fit in to the organization. But then is there also connection from the perspective of connecting people to one another, and the point that Jordan was making about voice and, sort of, it's not just that understanding of, where I fit, but it's that opportunity to be able to make comments, whether that's questions or being consulted or ideas or whatever it might be. So nice. No, it's some really good stuff here. Any other differences that we can see?
I like in Steph's group about helping people feel safe and respected.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And that's so important to have a healthy communication environment, really, because, sort of if we're just, the bad old days of we're just broadcasting out to people, you're very unlikely to be that effective in broadcasting at all anyway, because sort of if people aren't feeling safe, they're not feeling respected, they're not going to really be listening in the first instance. And once you get that symbiotic communication going, you've got much more chance of the communication in both directions being far more effective. And we've got transparency here as well, haven't we? That's interesting. I think Steph, yours is the one group that has transparency.
Yeah, I think we sort of discussed it as a group, and being transparent is obviously a really important part of that we believed of internal comms, because if people can tell if you're not being transparent, if you're hiding things, and it feels a bit inconsistent. So sometimes you have to be transparent and give messages that are difficult, but it's better than not giving the messages, and that causes more sort of resentment and mistrust, distrust.
No, that's really nice. So we've got transparency, which is a principle. We've got clarity, which is another principle. There's lots of focus on outcomes as well. You're supporting that business alignment. You're helping people feel aligned, sense of purpose. and and being informed and psychologically safe. So you've got that's sort of almost like the two sides of the coin there. That's really nice. No, there's some smashing definitions there. Well done. And it's not an easy task because it's quite an amorphous thing, isn't it? Internal communication. It's easy to end up thinking, oh gosh, I can't, it's really hard trying to summarize it down. But what I'm going to do now is share some slides and have a look at, well, you've come up with some really stonking definitions, actually, I think. Let's have a look at what others have done over time in terms of their definitions of what internal communication is. And I'm going to start off right at the beginning of the new millennium. This was these are both academic sources, and so the exchange of information and ideas. Then Welsh and Jackson, this paper, which is quite an interesting paper, it's worth having a look at. But it's the first time from an academic point of view that internal communication had been looked at really taking a stakeholder approach. And so what Welsh and Jackson were doing was saying, well, actually, it's not a question of just blasting stuff out to all. It is about really thinking about who are your stakeholders. And they develop 4 core categories that you'll see here, and then said, well, it's all about strategic management of interactions and relationships between those 4, as far as those 4 sets of stakeholders, those 4 perspectives are concerned. Any comments on either of those?
I think it's really interesting how you see the shift in how people behave at work and what people expect from working life as well. You've kind of moved away from profit only to looking at how people perform and how people behave in conjunction to how people perform, I suppose.
What, over time, that there's more
so the time thing, so there's more, it's more about, okay, so what can we do to support people and make them feel trusted and informed and up to date, and then the output from them would be better productivity, more input from them. Whereas absolutely. the first one in 2000 is very much, just about
it's
business.
Quite transactional, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a good word.
Yeah. So I think we have moved on from that quite transactional way of looking at it. And of course, sort of what has been important, though, is now in more of a cultural melting ground, is the whole diversity and inclusion piece and so on as well, which may be still important in your organisation, but it may not be, depending on the extent that the organisation is taking its lead from the United States. But yeah. And then here's 2 more recent ones, and have a look at these and tell me what you think of these as well. And you see that the IoIC one there at the bottom. Both of these are looking more at, well, what's the purpose of internal communication rather than a straight definition. What do you think of those 2? Which do you prefer?
I think it's interesting how in the second one they're talking directly about people, whereas it's less about the business, about the staff or whatever, more about thinking about people as individuals. instead of just within the business area.
And it's both, isn't it? It's getting that balance between the two. Because organisational performance is in there, but you're right, there's a very strong focus on people as well. And I think you do need both of those to have effective internal communication. I mean, for me, I'm not as keen on the Verghese one, because if I was an employee, I feel pretty hacked off at being described as an important asset to the firm. I would think, well, actually, I'm not an asset. I'm a human being. So yeah, I think you're right. And one of the
I think, sorry, just to
Jazz.
Sorry, I was just going to say that first one as well feels quite hierarchical, like it's very much top down. This is where everything's kind of coming from. Whereas actually, from my perspective in the business I'm in, it's everything we're trying to have tried to move away from in the past, I don't know, 8-9 years, from a business that does kind of be the voice of the people and the colleague rather than just senior kind of staff or executives.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, and I think this is an evolution that we've been going through, and it is sort of much more, I think, recognized now, that importance of the whole employee voice piece, really, and just the valuing and respecting people. I mean, that, to be fair, I mean, I was working in a consultancy back in the late 90s where our values were around sort of valuing and respecting the dignity of people at work, and that was our mission, really. So it's always been there, but it's more and more people get it now, I think. And one of the things one of the analogies I will typically use to talk about internal communication, it's a bit like a bridge, because we're building connections, and there's lots of emphasis on connections, and you gave emphasis on connections when you were talking about your definitions. And we're building that bridge between sort of at a crude level, senior management and then the people in organizations. And to have an effective bridge, what we need to do is have really strong foundations on both sides. So we, as communicators, need to really understand the business, really understand what the business issues are, really get our heads into all of that, be able to talk really business language and understand those concerns and support, really help address the concerns that senior managers have. And when you come on to look at communication planning, you'll see, sort of tools, etc., for doing that. I know you've got that as another session. But at the same time, if we don't really understand our people, if we don't understand how people think and how they feel and how they're likely to respond to things, then if we don't have that understanding as well, then we're not going to be effective. People who spend internal communication professionals who spend all their time, hanging around the C-suite or project managers or whatever it is, whoever those key stakeholders are, you will not do a really effective job unless you really get to know the people and people in the business and so on as well. And again, I know you'll have other sessions that you'll go on and look at that will look more at how you can do that. And I mean, my analogy of the bridge, actually, that's slightly old-fashioned now, because of course communication flows aren't just two-way, they're multi-directional, and at least one of the definitions talked about connecting people with each other. And so now I think it's probably more appropriate to say it's not just a bridge, it's a bit more like Spaghetti Junction if you were all UK based. Those of you who are, you'll know it's really complicated motorway junction in Birmingham with motorways going in just about every direction and looping round each other. And that's, you know, that's what we're facilitating much more these days. But okay, so we've looked a bit about what internal communication is and a definition for internal communication. And, you know, sort of what I've done in terms of really helping you think about, okay, so what is it for us? What do I think it is? But also to be looking at what others have said, what other academics, what other reputable bodies have said about internal communication and what it is, because that's what you need to be doing when it comes to your assignment. Not just this is what's in my head, but I'm going to research around a bit about this and I'm going to say, right, so here's a definition that, you know, I've pulled together based on, you know, sort of a range of different views, definitions that you've had, and making sure that you reference those as well. Because what we, as I said at the top, what I want you to be doing, what we need you to be doing, is really basing your studies on what other good sources have said, other good thinkers have said. And I'm emphasizing the other good thinkers, because what you're going to be best off doing is to really focus on things like IoIC, because they're a professional body. You'll see in a second, I've got various references from CIPD, the Chartered Institute of Personnel Development. Again, they're a professional body. And then I'm referring to a combination of academic sources, which you know you can rely on. If they're on Sol, you know they're going to be a reputable source, because the way that academics work is that they'll be research based or building on what other academics have said. So you can always trust that what they're going to be saying is valid. I'll also refer to management authors such as Bill Quirk, because he's a really reputable management sort of, he's written widely on internal communication, and, you know, sort of really sort of reputable consultant in the field. What I discourage you from doing is just having a Google round and looking at what comes up, and or just, you know, sort of using AI and seeing what that comes up with, because you'll get a whole range of different bits of consultancy think. Why would I discourage you from just looking at the sorts of white papers that you'll see from consultancies on the web? Why might that not be a good idea?
Disingenuous.
Yep. And why is it disingenuous? What's the purpose of, or why typically will an consultancy, an agency, put a white paper on the web about something to do with internal communication?
To sell their products.
To sell their products. Absolutely. And one of the things that we are doing in these qualifications is sort of really helping you in terms of thinking, right, what can I trust? What might be a bit dodgy? and it might not be, but sort of generally speaking, if it's sort of just an article on the web, you need to treat it with extreme caution. And I know this is something that Liz will be reinforcing to you as you go through the qualification generally. Anyway, I think how are we doing for time? Right, 13:50, that's nice. I think we've probably done definitions to death now. So let's move on. And actually, this is a bit of a segue between looking at definitions and then thinking, well, why are your companies investing in internal communication? And this, so this is actually looking at, well, what is successful communication? And we'll go on. I've got another session a group session you're going to be doing in a minute, thinking about the why. But here, and as I say, I'd really encourage you to look at CIPD resources. Unfortunately, more and more of them are behind paywall, but if there are resources you think are likely to be useful for you that you can see are on the CIPD website, it's worth asking Liz or asking Stella about it, because we can sometimes talk to CIPD and make some resources available to you that are behind the paywall. One of my colleagues on the Masters is very senior in CIPD, and that helps. But let's just have a quick look at this. Would we all agree with these points? Yeah, all happy with that? And again, a number of those you might come up with anyway, but you're going to do better if you can be showing that you've read round and you really know what these, sort of reputable sources have been saying about internal communication. Okay, so let's move forward again. So why invest in internal communication? Just think about the amount of money your organisations between them are spending this afternoon on you being here. That just that is an investment, a half day of each of your salaries. That's a lot of money. Your salary over a year, that's a lot of money. So, and then when you start to think about all of the activities, sort of actually the various different channels that you have, the town halls where people are having time out to actually hear from senior managers, etc. This is expensive stuff. So why is it that your organizations are doing it? Okay, and I'd like you to try and be as specific as possible. Because we can all say, oh, it's to build engagement. But, if you can be more specific than that, that will be great. And you may find that you'll be various things that will come up that will be the same. There'll be others that might differ. So, for example, for those of you that work in regulatory businesses, so if any of you are in finance, for example, or law, then there's a component that's around making sure that people are working within the regulation, making sure people really understand and comprehend what they need to do to stay legal, because otherwise the directors will end up in jail, or well, they won't, but they could end up in court. And then for others of you, it could be you have really, you're a customer facing organization, and actually getting those customer insights is invaluable in terms of helping you to improve your products and your services. You know, the more specific you can think of, the better. Any questions? And you'll all have a range of things, that returns that you're trying to get, but I just want you to be able to share and have a think for a bit about what they might be. So, any questions before I put you back in your groups? Okay, I'm going to keep you in the same size group, so 4 or 5 people in a group, though I'm going to move around the groups. So I'm recreating them. So I think I'm going to give you until 2:10 on this one. Okay, so that's just under 15 minutes. So it gives a good opportunity to talk around about it. And then I'll get some feedback from you, and then I'll do some sharing again, and then we'll have the first of our breaks. Okay, so for now, you've got until 2:10 to be thinking about, okay, so exactly why, what is it that our businesses want to get from investing in, or having internal communication, all those channels, having you, etc., etc. Any questions? Okay, right. Happy chatting then. Start recording again.
You're on it with the recording today. You don't need the reminder.
Wow, I am at the moment, but who knows? Lulling myself into a false sense of security. Excellent. I think I've got one more group to come back, and excellent. I think we're all back now. So, how did you get on?
Good.
Good, yeah, good.
Good. Right. So, the group that Lauren was part of, it doesn't have to be Lauren herself, but that group.
Yeah, I think.
What were some of the things that you came up with in terms of why the organisation's investing in you?
So I was part of that group with Lauren. So we got several points. So to summarise, for senior management to be more seen consistently within Network Rail, we have a Your Voice annual survey, and that always comes out as low for senior management comms. And
are you working with Amy Groom by any chance?
I'm not. Is she
in
comms?
She's Network Rail as well. No, she's one of my master students at the moment. So yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, again, we've got direction of the company, so making sure people are aware of that, especially again, selfishly going back to Network Rail and us going into GBR and Great British Railway. But then Laki mentioned about informing in regards to transformational change within her business that she works within. Lauren said about building engagement within an older workforce, which I can definitely relate to.
Right.
Yeah, that people that have been long in the tooth in the business, like 30 years and stuff.
Yeah.
So it's making sure they're up to date with new ways of working. And then finally, Jazz said making teams more efficient, especially within AI at the moment, and the different ways of working within that.
Yeah, and you know, because I can imagine there's all sorts of concerns and so on as well around AI and the potential impact on people's jobs and so on. And so just helping people to understand how it's going to be used, and also that support for training people to be using it efficiently and effectively. You're not necessarily doing the training, but of course you're helping to provide that environment, aren't you? Yeah. And it's interesting because what you've got there is a bit of a mix between these are things we do because we know that they're important. So, you know, that senior management visibility point is, I would agree, very important, because, you know, sort of research shows that if people are, you know, if senior managers are more visible, then that helps with things like trust, etc. But and it can also help because, you know, if you've got senior managers just explaining that bigger picture themselves, then people are getting that direct picture of what the organisation is and what it's trying to achieve. But of course, you could get a senior manager, you could say that to a senior manager and they could turn around and say, I don't really, why? I don't care. I don't care. Make me visible, make people, you know, sort of make sure that people know what the big picture is. I don't care. Why should I? I just do that. Get the so-and-so's doing their jobs. That's all we care about. Whereas some of the other things that you were talking about were more outcome focused when you started talking about things like the efficiencies and so on. And I think there's something about actually, you know, sort of it's that seeing the links through, because senior management visibility definitely is really important because it does help build trust and build those relationships, and also then contributes to people understanding where the organization's going and why and where they fit. But then it's almost like, so why is that important? So why is that important, everyone? I'm not going to carry on just picking on, sorry, is your name again?
Oh, shame. Sorry. I'm trying to change it, hun. So it's my name's India. My name's India, but my surname's Gain. So I don't know why
right.
it's come up
I'll
like
show
that.
you what to do. Hover over your picture.
Yeah.
3 dots on the right-hand side.
Yeah.
Click on those.
Oh, and rename.
And
Perfect.
rename. Yeah.
Cool.
Okay. So I'm not just going to pick on India. Everyone else, you know, taking that point around, if senior managers are more visible, then it will increase trust. It will help make sure people do know sort of where the organisation's going. Why does that matter? Why
it motivates people more.
Sorry?
It motivates people more if they know what direction they're supposed to be going in.
Okay.
If they don't, if they don't know what direction, they're not going to get there.
Yeah. So there can be benefits in terms of motivation. There can also be benefits in terms of if people really understand where it is that what their direction is, then people are more likely to be making the right decisions. Yeah. Because otherwise, if you don't know what you're aiming for, you could be really keen, but you could end up doing exactly the wrong thing. So ultimately, it's helping with productivity.
I think it humanises the leaders as well. We have a similar situation in our business where throughout our NPS surveys, it's lack of visibility, lack of communication from senior leadership. So we really encourage our senior leaders to get round all of our locations, and we see a real value in that too.
Yeah, and doing that can help people feel more valued, and again, feeling valued can be an important part of feeling that you want to make the biggest contribution that you can. So, but ultimately it's around the follow through to, are there harder business benefits here? Callum, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to kind of throw a little bit of a spanner in the works, and I can see a couple of people working from home, and we've found with leaders and stuff like that, it's hard to get people aligned with the leaders because of hybrid working and working from home, because people aren't as visible when you're just sat on a Teams meeting. It's hard. So we're trying to find ways to make them more visible and make them more relatable, whilst being virtual instead of in person. So
brilliant. Yeah, no, and I think hang on to that, Callum, because once we've finished this bit and we've had our break, we'll be going on to okay, so what can we do?
Yeah.
And it absolutely fits perfectly in that point fits perfectly in that. But before we do that, let's just talk to the other couple of groups. So the group that Alicia was in, though it needn't be Alicia who speaks.
Yeah, I was part of that group. So we just did the big long list of bullet points of why we think the investment's there. The things that we wrote down, we think shared knowledge, increasing productivity, prevents duplication, creates cohesion in an organisation, and consistency, avoids reputational damage when we've got a clear message, avoids the situation where you have Chinese whispers, hopefully improves retention over time. It unifies the narrative across multiple departments. It creates a human link to people and leadership, prevents loss in confidence. Hopefully, it helps towards our NPS score, and prevents silos. That was our list.
Brilliant. No, really good. Long list. Again, it's even better when you can make those connections. And you also had a mix of the two, and I can't remember them as well because you've got so many of them. But for example, right at the end, it helps prevent silos. Well, yes, if you find those opportunities for making connections across, then that's great. But why would you want to prevent silos? And it might be, for example, that you can share customer insights between different areas of the business. So if you're in a customer facing business, one part of the business can learn from another part of the business around what approach is particularly effective in a particular sector or whatever. But the more what I'm trying to say is just try and ground your thinking a bit rather than the big generalities. The more you can ground it and get into specifics, the better. And I rudely ignored Alicia, who had her hand up.
No, I just wanted to say that it's true that for the points we did this list, but when we were in the small groups, we were discussing, and the silos part, it's not always related to the business or to the exterior, but for example, even inside departments, maybe there are 2 or 3 departments that are working on the same action from a different perspective. Yeah. And if you are in the middle, because you get to know, because of the position, that that team is working on this, that it's so similar to what the other team is working. So how we can start bringing this together to optimize and also to keep consistency. Yes. So that it's not like maybe everyone is talking about leadership, but we are inside the same company and everyone is taking it with a different approach.
Yeah, absolutely. absolutely. No, that's great. And the more you can actually build those connections between areas where there's going to be a business benefit in doing so, then the better. And obviously with, we've got so many tools at our disposal now, haven't we, with Viva Engage and God knows what else to be doing all of that. I mean, again, a little anecdote from my past. I was running focus groups once in, it was in a manufacturing facility, and within manufacturing, you'll often find you've got different activities will happen along a different bit of the process. So imagine there's a great big sort of building with 4 different areas, and in each area, the employees were working on the widgets in a different way. And so you'd have process A, process B, process C, process D. And I had people from all 4 areas in this focus group, and we were talking about stuff, and there was one of the widgets was on the table, and they just started talking to each other, and the one from area 2 was saying to area 1, oh, that's interesting, how come there's that bit done like that? And then the other area was saying, oh, well, we always do that before we send it through to you. I'm not explaining this very well, but basically, just by talking to each other, they were able to identify that there was something that one of the groups was doing that the next group then had to undo before the widgets moved on. And I was thinking, wow, I've earned my money today then. Because they were able to say, oh, yeah, we can just self-correct here. Obviously, they had to involve their bosses in the process, but yeah, it's all sorts of benefits to coordinating like that. But as I say, that is a little bit of a detour. Let's move on to the final group, and then once again, I will share some stuff which I had prepared earlier. Excuse me, sorry, this is Top Cat, who is now joining the session, and hopefully won't climb on the laptop and cause complete chaos. Oh no, he's just getting himself comfortable again in a different position. Good. So, the group I haven't gone to yet, which is the group that Hannah is part of, though it needn't necessarily be Hannah. Tell me about yours.
I volunteered / was voluntold to be the spokesperson, but we had really good conversation, and a lot of our stuff's sort of been covered, but it's interesting to hear. So we were talking about the questions of why do organisations invest in comms and what return are they hoping for? And we were sort of saying about the return they're hoping for is kind of dependent on the organisation, I think. So I work for Zurich Insurance, and aside from...
Do you work with Richard Bannister?
Yeah, he's my boss.
Say hi.
Say positive things. Yeah, I will do. But as an insurer, I guess if I take away the fluffy stuff, their ultimate purpose is to drive profits and retain their customers. So for them, they want people to feel informed and engaged and motivated, like you were saying, to do their jobs well, to drive those profits and keep customers. And then we were also saying we had similarities. Callum and Steve, I think, also have areas of the business where people are on site all the time and traveling.
Yeah.
So they can't be checking Viva Engage or their emails all the time. So internal comms role, the importance of that is to kind of come up with different ways to keep that audience engaged. Right. Okay. And we were talking about the importance, going back to what the purpose of comms was. I quite liked the exchange example, of an exchange in dialogue, because I think it's just as important to hear from employees as it is to have that visibility from the top down. So yeah, we had interesting discussions from all our what our different organisations were, and what they would be hoping to get out of their investment, I guess.
Brilliant. Okay, and yeah, that does very much sort of build on what the others have said, but that all sounds great. So let's look at what I had pulled together earlier on this, and then I haven't forgotten that I promised you a cup of tea, so we'll have a break after this. So, right, okay. So one of the reasons that I've built this in is, well, I've built it in because it's going to help with your assignment, as I hope you've noticed. So do make sure you're keeping notes on all of this. But this is a quote from Quirk, who, as I say, is a management consultant who's sort of his thinking's high, is well respected, and he wrote a book called Making the Connections, which this is from. And he was saying, well, it's very often one of the problems with internal comms is that people are asked to do loads of stuff, so you end up really busy, but they're not necessarily seen as being very valuable. And I don't know if that's an experience that you can relate to at all, but that, the can you just phenomenon, and people not necessarily really seeing those links in between what you're doing and that you're actually adding business value. And again, I think, in practical terms, the way in which you're going to be able to do that is the approach you take to communication planning. And you've got a session, I know, on that. And the way in which you position yourselves as people that aren't just there to say, oh, what do you want to communicate and how, but you're there to say, what do we want to be achieving? What do you want people to be doing as a result of this communication? What do you want people to be thinking and feeling, in order that they'll do what it is we want them to do? It's making that shift in the conversations that you're having. And as I say, the communication planning session will be the one where you'll look at this. But that's what can really help sort of get you seen as a valuable commodity. But in terms of really adding value, these are the things which, and obviously this is old now, but I think we can agree that all of these are still pretty important from a senior management perspective, can we? I think they're all things that senior managers will continue to be, to have concerns about. And, sort of a number of the things that just the examples you've given already have helped will show how you can make a contribution to that, that cooperation point. Well, we were just talking about silos, weren't we? The whole thing around, really making sure that people are motivated, etc. When it comes to things like a high cost base, well, a lot of the work I did when I was in-house on internal communications was in really helping people to identify for themselves operational improvements that could be made, just streamlining the processes to make them more efficient, more effective, using people's knowledge and experience to do that. And so all of these things are things that internal communication can really have a direct impact to. And Quirk's book is well worth looking at. This is from the first few chapters, which look at, well, what contribution is internal communication making. So it's worth having a look at that. And then again, this is back to the CIPD communication fact sheet, which is looking both at, well, what is it we want to be achieving from communication, and also a bit about, well, and how we're going to go about doing that. So performance, retention, well-being, all these are all sort of high level points, but are all important in terms of the contribution that internal communication can be making. And sort of look at the fact sheet, and that will tell you more about that. The whole staying connected, we've talked about that. Understanding purpose and strategy, we've talked about that. Identify with its values, develop a sense of belonging. Any comments or questions on that bit? Or are we all thinking, oh, we're going to have a cup of tea in a minute? And
is that link? It
Oh, is that Callum? I think you're breaking up a bit for me. Can other people hear okay?
Network's just dropped out. Apologies.
No, he sounded like a robot.
Yeah, so tell us again.
The slide pack, will that be shared to us after with the link in?
It is, yeah.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, and then how many of you are aware of Engage for Success? Right. engageforsuccess.org is an absolute treasure trove. And this comes from back in 2009. David McLeod and Nita Clark were asked by the then government to do a piece of work, a piece of research, to look at, what difference does employee engagement actually make? Does it help with productivity? And if so, how to go about doing it? And they did this this piece of research, and these were some of the things which they identified employee engagement can contribute to. And internal comms is an important part of employee engagement. It's not all of it. We can't do it on our own, but we can make a huge contribution to it. And in fact, we'll be looking at that after the break. And the first Engage for Success report really summarises everything they found in that first piece of research, and you can find it on the Engage for Success website. They then, in 2012, they published another report called Nailing the Evidence, which was taking a deeper dive into looking at the actual difference that employee engagement is making in different organisations. And they did a follow-up report in 2016 as well. But there's also lots and lots of other information on that website. So it's really well worth having a route round on it, because there's a lot of really valuable information on that. But again, lots of specific things that engagement stroke internal communication can contribute to. Okay, so any questions about any of that bit? And has that helped when you're thinking about one of the things that you're going to be writing about in your assignment is the role and purpose of internal communication in your organisation. It's giving you some ideas about how to be approaching that and what to think about. Good. In that case, it is 14:37 at the moment. And so, now 14:38, I'm going to give you until 1:45 for a break. So that's 7 minutes. So just time for you know, tea, bring the cup of tea back with you. And then, because I'm going to build another one in later on this afternoon as well. Okay, so I've split it between the two. So I will see you promptly at 2:45, please. Okay, see you then. Resume recording. Yeah, it's recording now. So there's all these great benefits that we can get from, and as I say, this particular slide is looking specifically at engagement, which we can make a big contribution to. So when it comes to looking at, well, what do we actually do? How can we make that contribution? The way I'm going to do this is by just looking behind the scenes a bit at, well, what is it that helps build engagement itself? Because as I say, we make a big contribution to this. And so I'm going to, I'll just open it up. Everyone see my slides okay? I know it's a blank slide at the moment. So this is from a presentation by MacLeod and Clark, and it's a really high-level summary of the initial research that they did. And so what they said, first of all, was in engagement terms, then, you know, we're operating in a tricky environment these days, because we're no longer in a situation where everyone respects, the bosses. We don't respect authority very much. In society, there's been a very big breakdown in terms of trust generally. And, if you wanted to look at data to support that, there's something called the Edelman Trust Barometer. Edelman is Edelman, and they're an agency that every year they do this international survey to look at levels of trust. And basically, every year they find it's very, very low indeed. The people that we tend to trust are our peers rather than anyone else. We certainly don't trust many authority figures externally, and internally, levels of trust in senior management have gone down as well. So it's a death of deference. We're no longer doffing our caps to our so-called superiors, and there's a loss of trust. So it's a hard environment to start with. Oh, and they are talking here about employee engagement, which is what leads to all of these sorts of things. What we're not talking about is, oh, that was an engaging presentation, or that was engaging video, it used some good techniques. That isn't engagement. We're talking about really where people sort of want to stay with the organisation, feel motivated, want to do their best, will speak positively about the organisation. That's what true employee engagement means. And we have a big part to play in all of that. But MacLeod and Clark said, and in a minute, the exercise you're going to have is, what contribution can internal communication be making to all of this? Okay, so it's helping, it's kickstarting your thinking on, so how can we be carrying out our role? MacLeod and Clark said, well, to start with, you need to have good foundations in place. And so you need leaders that are aware of all this stuff, aware of engagement, aware of the fact that people make the difference. You need to have a relevant business model. And so a business model which involves really recognizing that, sort of employee voice, listening to people, being aware of, the sort of the knowledge and contribution that people can make, that's built into the fabric of the way in which the business runs. So this is in no way about, we do an engagement survey. That's a very transactional approach to engagement. What McLeod and Clark are talking about is a transformational way of doing engagement. And they talk about a leadership coalition of collaboration. So that's leaders who themselves pull together and in the same direction. Because otherwise we're on hiding to nothing, aren't we? If you've got leaders that are all pulling in different directions, how are you going to get that sense of purpose and direction that people should have? How are you going to contribute to that when there's no clarity at the top about it? And again, when we look at what Bill Quirk talks about, one of his key points that he makes in the early chapters of his book is about the importance of helping senior managers really distill down what they're doing into a few key priorities that are simply expressed. Because that way there's some hope of other people really understanding what it is the organisation's all about. If you've got 24 different priorities, then nobody is going to get it. Or if they're articulated in complex ways, no one's going to get it. Now, at level 1, which is the level that you're operating at for the foundation diploma, you're not going to be working with senior managers like that. Probably it'll be others within your organisations that are doing it. But it is important to have that sort of clarity around the priorities. So then McLeod and Clark, when they did this presentation, they were talking explicitly about, one of the ways internal communications can help. And so they've got a 4-quadrant model, that any good piece of research or thinking always has a 4-quadrant model. And so here we've got engagement is this axis. So low engagement is here, high engagement is here. And and alignment, people knowing what they're doing and why, or what they have to do, and how that contributes, that's this way. And so one of the risks is if you've got high engagement, people who are really, really keen to be doing their best and to be contributing, but they don't know the business direction, then what you're going to get is headless chickens. People who are really keen, really want to make a contribution, but keep not contributing the right thing. And that can lead to chaos. If, on the other hand, you've got people who aren't engaged but are very well informed about the business direction, I know what way the business is heading. Yeah, I've been really well informed about all of that. I know what I'm supposed to do. So you've got alignment, but no engagement. You end up with tin soldiers. Yeah, we will do what we're told. Also, not what you want. What you want is a combination of the two. So you've got people who are both highly engaged and there's high alignment, and then you've got people who are high flying. So how do we achieve this nirvana? 4 pillars of engagement. If you get these right, you will get engagement, according to, and this is quite a simplistic way of looking at engagement, but it's very well known, and it is a very simple and effective way of looking at it. So, and it's these pillars or enablers of engagement that I'm going to get you to think about in a minute. So to start with, the organisation needs a strong strategic narrative. Now that means understanding where the organisation's come from, what's important to it, where it is now, where it's going, and how people can contribute to that. So it's not just what's happening next, it's actually that organisational story, they say, is important. And I think part of that is because, you know, helping people know what the values are, where they come from, is such an important part of this mix. But having a really clear narrative, which is constantly updated, so people understand what's happening, why it's happening, and feel really well informed about it. But it's within that whole big picture, the story of the organisation. So that's pillar 1. Pillar 2 is having engaging managers. And those are managers that coach and stretch people. And clearly that's more than just internal communication. We're not going to be able to do that on our own. There's other things that need to happen as well. But we can play a part in it. And actually using managers effectively as part of the internal communication mix is incredibly important. Ultimately, people, they don't trust senior managers, but people typically will have a good relationship with their managers, and they'll, you know, well, in fact, there's a truism: people don't leave the organisation, they leave their managers. So where managers are really part of the internal communication mix, it can make a big difference. So have a think about when you're in your groups, or how are we using our managers and supporting our managers to be engaging as well. Then there's employee voice. And we've already talked about that a bit, haven't we? You know, giving people the opportunity to be able to, as a minimum, ask their questions about what's happening, but, you know, potentially making much more of a contribution than that, and really having their views sought where it can make a difference to whatever's being done, and giving people the opportunity to communicate with one another. And again, we've already been talking about collaboration. All of that is really important to engage. And in fact, this is one of the strongest of the enablers. And clearly we do have a role to play in this. And then finally, there's values and behaviours. And by values and behaviours, or sometimes this is called organisational integrity. I think it is in the report. So this is not just making sure people know what the values and behaviours that are expected of them are. More importantly, does the organisation live the values it says are important? Because that's what makes the difference in terms of engagement. You know, when senior managers say something's important, is it followed through in reality? Do the senior managers and managers generally, you know, anyone who's seen as leader in the organisation, do they live the values. Now, what contribution can we make to that? So that's more than enough input from me. Any questions about that? Because if not, in a second, that's the task I'm going to give you in groups again. So first of all, any questions about the 4 key enablers?
Not so much a question, but more, I suppose it can be a question. What if the organisation has managers that aren't engaged and leaders that don't live by our values? How, I know we've got to answer that question. How do we influence that? But I'm going to struggle a little bit with this one, given the culture that we've got currently.
Yeah, and I mean, it does come back to, there's something about, actually, if at every level of leadership there is no interest in any of this, you are going to be in a very difficult position, really, to start. But at the same time, I think, you know, what you can do is think about, well, what are the principles that I can take forward, and that, you know, sort of that the organisation will be prepared to do. You'll probably find there is some, even within the culture that you've got, that you'll be able to do. But it's a really good question, because certainly, particularly when it comes to things like employee voice, it's dangerous to start trying to do really, you know, involving things if you've got very autocratic managers, because all that's going to happen is nothing will happen, and people will end up more disengaged rather than engaged. And so I think that's something to be acknowledging when you're thinking about what you can and can't do within your particular organisation as well. Does that help, Kim?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Right. Any other questions? Right. Okay. In that case, take a picture of this, because you're going to need it to remind yourselves. And I'm going to give you until, I think, just before 3:25. So you've got 5 minutes you could potentially use on each of these. I'm deliberately giving you quite a long time on each, because you can actually be sharing about, well, what are we doing in practice on this? And that's, you know, that's going to be really useful for you in general terms, I think. And, you know, it's a good opportunity for within the confines of the qualification that we're doing, just to be doing some sharing, but do it in a really as targeted a way as you can across the 4 enablers. Does that make sense? Okay, great. So to remind you, what is it in really practical terms you can be doing to contribute to the 4 enablers? And so just big sharing session. Can you all see how this can help contribute to your assignment as well? Are the links clear? Because I'm really keen they are, because all of this is stuff that, you know, hopefully is going to be directly helpful for you. Good. Okay, so I'll stop sharing, and I am going to break up the rooms again. Hold on, I'm recreating. Oh, we've lost 2 people. I lost Lily as well. Okay. So what do you want to do? At the moment, I've got 2 4s and a 3. or I can change this to make it a 5 and a 6. It's completely up to you. You'll get more airtime if it's 2 4s and a 3. You'll get more hearing from a greater range of other people if it's a 5 and a 6. Shall I go for a 5 and a 6? Does that suit people better? Yeah. Okay, hold on. I'm changing it. Right. There we go. Okay, so yeah, 25 past. Now, yeah. I'm not getting the message. I was for the first half of the recording in progress. Are you hearing that? Because it's telling me it's recording, so I assume it is.
Yeah, there's a little message at the top saying it's recording.
Brilliant, brilliant. Okay, so how was that in terms of a nice sort of opportunity just to be doing some sharing?
Ran out of time in our group.
Yeah. Chatterboxes.
Yeah. Apologies. I'd love to give you loads of more time, but unfortunately, we have got a lot to get through today.
It was really good to sort of hear what other people do, though. Like, I've already got a few things on the list that I want to use in my day-to-day job. So yeah, it's good.
No, I thought this would serve a multi purposes. Excellent. Well, let's start off then with strategic narrative and just give me a little bit of we're going to have to keep this fairly summarized, and to motivate you to summarize, once we've finished doing this, we'll have another tea break. Okay. So I'll hear from a summary from the group that Jazz is in, please, of what you do to contribute to strategic narrative. And then I'll ask the other group anything that's been missed that's worth adding to that.
Is that was a group I was in. Are you guys? We didn't actually discuss who was going to say it. Are you guys happy with me to just dive in? Yeah. Okay. Fab. So my group. So what internal comms can contribute to strong strategic narratives is starting from day one, so induction process, going through the history, where we're at, what's in store, regular all employee calls, keep them short and snappy, so easily digestible. Employee roadshows with senior leaders, so having that visibility and getting people on board. Strategy hub on SharePoint, so that information is accessible at any time, and keep it fresh by reminding and signposting back to the hub. So that's what we have.
Brilliant. So some great stuff there, and it encompassed things like, the points that you made earlier about the importance of management visibility, etc. Some of those channels will, sort of help to, make sure that that's happening as well, which is great. What about the other group? Anything that you would add to Steph's summary there in terms of the different methods?
I think we literally said pretty much everything the same. The only other thing that I'd say is having consistency across all your channels. So we use Viva, we have a SharePoint, making sure that obviously all the messages kind of all joined up instead of it just being mishmashy messages everywhere, and people don't get the full story and they think, hold on, that comm says this, but then on Viva it says this, and then people just get all disjointed.
Yeah. So again, I keep pointing, don't I, to that academic, to that communication planning session that you're going to have. But I think that's really useful for, when it comes to that, through doing that planning, making sure that you're really thinking through what you're trying to achieve with each of the channels to be reinforcing key messages about the organization. So no, that's excellent. And in with that, you could also be talking about things like, because transparency as well sort of fits in with this as well. Well, I think, doesn't it? That strategic narrative about, you know, sort of making sure that people really do feel that they're being well informed about the organisation. We could have a long conversation about that, and unfortunately we don't have the time to, because this is such an overview session really. But yeah, I think, did you also talk about how you can go about making sure that people don't just know the history and what's happening and why it's happening and what's happening next, but they also understand about where their fit is, you know, what they're going to be contributing to that? Did you discuss that at all when you were talking about
Our group did a little bit. We kind of spoke about the induction and actually covering kind of some of those things off in like the org-wide inductions when people come in, but then we also spoke about potentially kind of more in depth around team inductions and actually then bringing it back to your role and more specific stuff for you.
Yeah. And I think it's beyond induction as well, isn't it? Because this is something that will be an ongoing task, you know, sort of every time something new happens that's impacting on different teams across the organisation. Well, you know, what's the relevance for the team? And that, you know, sort of, there's a certain amount that we can do with all the personalization, etc., that we have at our disposal these days with the various channels we have. But it kind of leads neatly into, I think, the second of the 4 pillars, because I think this is one of the areas where line managers can be part of our secret weapon in terms of internal communication, really. And with that kind of teaser, I'm going to go to the group that Kim was in and ask, so what did you say about engaging managers?
I can go if you want. We didn't actually discuss who was going to speak either, but we have senior leader days, manager meetings, localized. So if we are struggling with certain managers, we'd have special sessions with them. Generally, if you're presenting at a manager meeting, we will give a quick overview with the manager to discuss what they're going to be talking about, if they need any pointers, if they want us to reduce down what they're saying so they can practice if they want to. Because actually one thing we've noticed is it's quite scary and daunting for those managers as well, also to be presenting to peers and below. I think that's all we're doing at the moment for that.
Okay, no, there's some really good stuff there, because I think supporting managers is just such an important part of what we do if internal communication's actually going to be effective at all. I mean, particularly for those of you in hard to reach, you know, with hard to reach people, because, you know, sort of, oh, who was the Network Rail person? I can't remember who it is now. Who was Network Rail?
India.
Okay, India. Okay, so for places like Network Rail, and then I can see Hinkley Point there behind you, Callum. You know, sort of, you're going to be so reliant on your managers, I'm guessing, to be part of the communication mix. But it is over and above that. I don't, you know, I think it's hard to think about an environment where you're not going to really want your managers to be a very active part of what it is that you're doing. And, you know, that whole thing about, as Laki was saying, just making sure that, you know, if you've got key messages that are being communicated and you want them to be part of that, you want them to be reinforcing or talking about, so what does this mean for us in our area, and drawing that out from people, then it's so important to spend time with them first. One of the things that I find when I go and audit different organisations, one of the concerns I have is where people just send out the messages to managers and FAQs. Oh, here's the frequently asked questions you might get asked. But managers themselves, and this is, particularly when anything might be sensitive or difficult at all, do they have the opportunity to explore their own understanding of it? Do they have the opportunity to ask their questions? Because you want them to buy in, you want them to support whatever it is you're talking about. You're not going to be able to do it for everything, but certainly where it's important, providing those opportunities for them. I know when the last in-house job that I had, one of the things I got our board to be doing, our directors, was once a quarter going round to each of our sites and running a session for our managers, but then having breakout groups with small groups of managers, so they could have discussions about what was coming up, what was happening, and we made it really, really interactive. And I think that that was invaluable for us, bringing up people on board. Anyway, I'm going to stop talking because this is your sharing session, and I'm going to go to the other group now. What else did you have about engaging managers?
I don't mind taking this one if anyone wants. We had kind of a similar conversation, and just to kind of build on how we would engage managers. A couple of, I can't remember who said what because everyone put in such valuable information, but it was mentioned about a leadership toolkit, a manager's toolkit, and allowing that to be integrated into a SharePoint. I can't remember someone said they had a SharePoint, which managers can go to and find all the valuable feedback and information to help them manage. Because I think it was Jazz said that some people will tend to go to a manager's position because it's the next step in their career path, and they might not necessarily be built for that. So it's a learning curve for them as well. And also using leadership away days, we spoke about how they can use those tips, tools, conversations from a employee survey to say, go back to their employees and go, this is what we've spoken about, and kind of have that two-way conversation of this is what we've learned in the senior leadership away day. We want to implement that into our relationship between employee and manager. And that's a good way of building on it, I suppose.
Amazing. Yeah, no, great. Really, really good ideas there. And I mean, the one thing, just a slight point in case I didn't communicate this well, the second pillar, engaging managers, that is managers who are engaging. But in order to have that, I think we have to engage managers in exactly the way that you just talked about, Callum. So, but yeah, in pure engagement terms, it's managers who really will coach, stretch, who'll help people understand the relevance of stuff to them by sort of having those facilitated conversations, etc. I just wanted to make sure that was clear. No, brilliant. I'm going to move on to employee voice next. So I'll go back to, no, it will be Callum's room first. So what did you have on employee voice? And then we'll go to the other group and then the last one, and then we'll have our cup of tea.
I don't mind talking on this one.
Brilliant.
We'll go around the team. So I think all of us agreed about employee surveys, so feedback surveys and pulse surveys of how they're feeling on different topics is a really important tool to use. Offer opportunities for them to ask leaders questions. So if you're hosting a town hall, set out Q&A time, not just have it as like an afterthought, and offer opportunities, whether it's like a drop-in session with the CEO regularly, just to offer that openness to answer questions. And we were talking about the importance of groups like Viva Engage, channels like Viva Engage with groups on where employees can just post whenever they want about work achievements or experiences that they've had, and encouraging colleagues and leaders and managers to interact with that, because I think if you have that open forum and people can sort of say professionally whatever they want whenever they want, I think it encourages a conversation and engagement from all aspects.
Brilliant. No, really good. How about the other room? What additional points did you have there?
The other thing that we had was we've got different networks and partnership councils that anyone can be a member of. Within Viva Engage, we have their own community, so they can communicate within themselves. But generally, so there was a transgender webinar about pronouns and things like that. So each group will run whatever they want to, and it's free for anybody to attend or have suggestions of what they'd like to be covered within those sessions.
Brilliant.
Focus groups as well, focus or working groups as well that take one thing that they need, that they want to change within the organization, and then they can discuss it, and then then we can look at how to make their suggestions a reality then.
Fantastic. And presumably, if you can't, explain why not as well. Yeah. And that, I think, is a really sort of key point with this. And hold on, I'm just going to share briefly again. One of the things that I think is, oops, hang on, sorry, just make sure this is working. Oh, sorry, the slides aren't moving forward. I'll just click to make sure they do. One of the things I learned when I was first a consultant was around making sure that the directions of communication work effectively together. And this was a very simple model that was shared with me at that time, and I still think it works. And there's something about, that the strategic narrative, or that sort of downward communication, understanding what the organization's trying to do and why, and keeping people updated. That's almost like step one, because that way people have got a context to be making their comments and everything in. And then step two is making sure that you have got good upward flows of communication, so that people can, as a minimum, be asking questions. And that might be, if you have got autocratic managers, that might be all that you can do. But beyond that, if you can have those opportunities for people to be making a contribution, making suggestions, getting involved in working parties or whatever, that's absolutely great. But then, that in itself, that then needs to feed back into the downward communication again. So if a contribution, if a suggestion can't be carried forward, actually the task of explaining why you can't do it and linking that back into your story of the organization or the project or whatever it is, why you can't do it, that helps reinforce the downward stuff. Likewise, if people are asking questions, then make sure those get answered, because that can help you be reinforcing what it is that you're saying to people, and getting that kind of virtuous cycle of communication going is so important. And doing that, and then building in all the lateral communication, people communicating with one another, that kind of is the most effective way of doing it. Because if you start just building in all that collaboration stuff first, but you haven't got a strong kind of communication relationship from the top to the bottom and the bottom to the top, these can go awry as well. So that's just making that cycle of communication work effectively can be so important. Anyway, sorry, that was just a slight diversion from me, but
sorry, Liz.
Yeah.
Liz, what is the lateral communication? So you've got the
communication across, where it's sort of connecting people across the organization. So typically, you know, you groups in Viva Engage, that sort of thing, would be a way of connecting people across the piece. And again, there's loads of different ways we could talk about that are lateral, but I think the point is make sure that people have that connection with the organization itself, as well as just connecting with each other, because otherwise it's all going to go horribly wrong.
Perfect. Thank you.
Sense?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Now, have I asked both groups about the employee voice piece? I think I have, haven't I? In that case, we will quickly finish off with organisational integrity / values and behaviours, so we can then get on to our cup of tea. So the group that Hannah is in, not necessarily Hannah, but somebody within that, in fact, is someone within that group. What did you have on that one? This is values and behaviours.
We did have, so our objectives are aligned with something that we call blueprint behaviours. And also we do nominations every quarter, so people can nominate and win £100 per award. And then I think there was a star recognition rules as well, where and other incentives are where there's like cash pots for like achievements against the values and behaviours.
Smashing. So really reinforcing those values and behaviours. Fantastic. How about room one, the room that India is in? Doesn't need to be India necessarily.
I can take this one. So we ran out of time a little bit, but some of the stuff that we covered very quickly, actually, it differed like between the different organisations that we work for. So we spoke about in terms of behaviours, maybe like daily safety briefings and kind of always making sure that those things are kind of in the forefront of people's minds. We spoke about kind of from my perspective in the organisation I'm in, actually our values and behaviours run through performance reviews. So you're kind of constantly bringing it back to the role that you're in and how you kind of show up. We also had like decals in the office of behaviours and values, infographics and visuals through all of our comms, and like awards and that kind of things as well. So very similar to the first group.
Excellent. No, that's great. And I think that reinforcement of values and behaviours and telling stories about when people have lived the values, lived the behaviours, all of that is so important. The pillar itself is more about, are they being lived? And what you're doing, the examples you've given are good examples of how you can help make sure they're lived by the people in the organisation. But there's also, are senior managers practicing what they preach? Or are they saying people are our most important asset, and then the moment there's a downturn in terms of profit, laying people off? You know, and it's that I think the this pillar is getting at, though I think all of it, what you've said as well, is important. And I know when I first became a consultant, one of the first things I did was to go around and interview about 20 senior internal communication practitioners about their practice. And one of the things, and we published a book on the back of the research I've done, but one of the first things that, one of the most important things that people talk to me about is hold a mirror up to the organisation. Help people see when, oh, How bizarre. I've just had my hand come up, and I wasn't anywhere near my laptop. Right. So that's probably some AI helping me. How nice. So things like surveys and so on, focus groups, just feedback generally. Yeah. How are people seeing the organisation? How are they seeing senior managers? Are there discrepancies between what senior managers say and what happens in practice? And in a safe way, being able to feed that back. Because if there isn't that organisational integrity, if people think, oh, well, they say one thing, but they do something else, that really undermines the messages, doesn't it? And so I'd never say just go, well, I'll give you an example. There's one organisation I worked in, big efficiency drive, seen the directors, because they still had offices, they all had bunches of bowls of fruit delivered to their office every day. And people, I was picking up feedback when I was doing focus groups and stuff. Well, they say that operational efficiency is very important. Why do we have to pay for their vitamins? Can't they afford it for themselves? They're well enough paid. Now, I wasn't going to just go and knock on the door and say, why have you got that bowl of fruit there? That's not, that's pretty hypocritical, isn't it? Because I wouldn't have been in work for very long. But I was able to feed it back as part of the overall feedback of what I'd gathered generally, that people saw a disconnect between what the organisation was saying and what was happening in practice. And that way, the directors were able to take a decision for themselves about whether they would carry on having the bowls of fruit or whether they would pay for their own vitamins. And so that's important too, I think. So, surveys, etc., then yes, they're really important in terms of giving voice, but they do give that opportunity to really say, are we practicing what we're preaching? Because otherwise it's undermining the other messages so much. Okay, I think we're all talked out on that, but it was a pretty important session, I think, wasn't it? Because it's really getting into the practicalities and the nitty-gritty of it all. But what's also important is having a cup of tea, and it's 15:53. I would like you back on the absolute dot of 4 o'clock, please, because I've got a few other things I want to run through with you. We might have another breakout group. I'll just see how the time goes. But the 3 ones that I really wanted us to have, we've done. But now 7 minutes, tea, wee, and whatever else you need to do, but absolutely back on the dot of 4, please. Right. See you in 7. Oh, hang on. Any questions at all from that last session that we just did?
Not a question from me, but just more of a point and a question to the group is, we're just about to implement in February Viva Exchange. So at some point I'd be really interested to pick the brains of the people that are using it around what works well, what doesn't work so well, and what kind of to watch out for, if that's okay.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, in my experience with Viva Engage, and I think this goes for anything on the employee voice type, contribution type front, it's so much of it is culture dependent. Really, it is that psychological safety point which one of the groups came up with in the first one, but I think you'll get all sorts of really useful hints and tips from one another, and that's one of the great things of doing this this qualification, isn't it? You can really learn from each other as well as learning from the workshops and then the reading that you're doing and so on. Anyway, I must carry on, and right, so I'm not quite sure why we've gone back to this particular slide, but moving swiftly onwards. Sorry, let me just, oh, sorry about this. Whoops, no, that really hasn't helped at all. So let's just, I just need to move things around on my screen because at the moment I can't get to the little icon that means I can expand the slides. Hold on, right now I can reach it now. Okay, so yeah, this was the final slide that I could have used within this session. This again, this Bill Quirk is good on this in terms of the importance of, you know, and within employee voice, understanding how people are thinking and feeling about something, you know, as an output of your employee voice, knowing what they might associate a particular initiative with, what their fears and hopes about a particular initiative might be. You know, all of that is going to make so much difference when it comes to you communicating effectively. So I just wanted to put that in there as another little flag in terms of some of the benefits that you can get from employee voice. The more you listen to your employee voice, the more opportunity there is for you to get your downward communication right. But we are going to move on, and I said we'd do a little bit about what the role of the internal communication practitioner is. And this is a slide that I put together, years and years and years ago, about there's sort of various different kind of roles that you can have. And in some ways, the role, you can end up with a role that's a bit like being a post room. And so, you know, that's when you're stuck and, you know, you're being asked, can you put out these messages and we want them to go to these audiences, please? And a lot of what you're doing is making sure that your distribution lists and your targeting and so on is just spot on. Not terribly added value, really. That's not where you want to be stuck. You don't want to be in some sort of post room function where you're not really adding any value in terms of how the messaging is put together, or you know, sort of how you are communicating it. And then there's another way of looking at the IC practitioner, is it's a bit like being in a press office. So what you're doing is you're really skilled in terms of crafting messages and thinking about how to communicate things in a highly effective way. And you might be really good at, I don't know, putting together events, or putting together videos or podcasts or whatever. And, you know, that's, you're starting to add value. You're starting to be really involved in how you do, you know, both how you put together any messaging, but also how you're delivering it as well. And then you've got the kind of the agency, and some of you, I'm sure, will use communication agencies to help with your communication, to be, you know, sort of leading on, for example, your e-zines or other of your sort of communication collateral generally. And that's really sort of where you're thinking through, so what exactly do we need in terms of our channels and how are we going to put them together? And that's again further up the food chain. And then you get to be the trusted advisor, the internal consultant. So there you're working together with project managers, other managers, and advising them on what's going to work and how. So that's a very simple way of looking at it. Now we've got the IoIC profession map, which again I was involved with. I led the work on doing this and then revising it. And are you familiar with the profession map? Yeah, because if not, make sure you look at it. It's really going to be useful for you. It is going to be useful to refer to. There's too much, you know, you're not going to be able to pull out all the detail and use all the detail because it's just crammed with it. But in terms of the role, and as you know, the foundation level, the foundation diploma is very much aimed at level 1 of the diploma, but it looks at 4 different levels right through from the foundation level to level 2, which is more of the kind of the agency type level in terms of the old way that I used to think of it. And then the sort of level 3 and 4 are the increasingly sort of strategic advisory levels. For each of those levels, what we did with the profession map was look at what is it that people need to do in order to be internal communication professionals, and what's the knowledge and skills that they need to do that. And for each one, we divided it into these 6 segments. And you'll see that's the purpose of internal communication. We talked about that first, right in the centre. And then, so you're looking at communication planning. You're looking at really understanding the people of the organisation, creating content, but also curating content, managing those channels, conducting research, measuring and influencing and advising. And round the outside of the map are the qualities that the group that were working on this thought that internal communicators should have. And so, you know, that gives an overview of it. For the purposes of this session, I've kind of summarized with the level 1 kind of role, but the map itself has way more detail in terms of each of these different segments, so it really is worth a look, and you know, you can refer to it within your assignments. But have a look through the responsibilities. Give you a minute to read it. You don't need me to read it out for you. So to what extent does that, and this really is really high level, to what extent does that kind of reflect what you feel your role is? Probably oversimplified, because I really have simplified it to death in this. Any comments at all? Challenges? I mean, this is a simplification of a simplification, because the profession map itself, you know, when we were looking at it, we realised jobs themselves within internal communication, they don't necessarily fit in 4 levels. You know, we're not that established a profession for that to be the case. So lots of people will, you know, they'll have a mix of things that they're responsible for, some of which will be from level 1, some will be from level 2. In small organizations where you're a bit of a lone practitioner, it might be you've got a bit of a mix of levels 1, 2 and 3. But certainly the sort of the thinking behind the map is really robust, so it's worth having a look at. All right, I'm going to move on swiftly again, unless there are any comments on this bit. And then the other thing I wanted to include before we do our final exercise of the afternoon is around where internal communication fits in the organisation, because there is something I know within the question that asks about where your role fits. And what I've done here is I've looked at the most typical places where internal communication fits. So sometimes it fits in with corporate comms. Generally, when that's the case, there's a lot of emphasis on aligning internal and external messages. And it'll typically, you'll report into corporate comms where the focus of your role is very much around that sort of, it's almost like the internal advocacy to support the external advocacy that's going on in the organisation. Might fit with HR. Typically, that's the case where what the organisation wants from internal comms is more supporting change. It might fit with reporting direct to the CEO or the MD. That can seem to be a really attractive place for it to fit. In practice, in my experience and talking to internal comms professionals, where that's the case, what you need to be careful of is you don't end up doing vanity publishing on behalf of that CEO, managing director. You know, they want lots and lots of communication about them and what they're doing and how fantastic the organisation is and everything. Might fit with marketing, in which case, again, it's usually that what they're looking for, the organisation's looking for, is the emphasis on that internal sort of brand alignment, really. Or it might fit somewhere else, like business planning. But if it fits somewhere else, it's usually going to be because that's a priority for the organisation at the moment. And certainly in my time, I've worked for within corporate comms, I've worked within HR, I've always worked really closely with MDs and CEOs, but I've always avoided reporting to them directly. I've worked within someone who's certainly whose mindset was mainly with marketing, and I've worked for a business planning director. So, you know, I've fitted in different parts at different in organizations at different points. It's typically been because, as I've said, where the emphasis is at the time. Like when I reported into the business planning director, it's because moving from a reactive to a proactive approach to how we did business was the key thrust of what we were doing. And so I was working really closely with him. When I was in HR, it was because I was supporting a big culture change program. But the key thing for me is you can sit anywhere, but you need those relationships across the organisation as a whole. You're not just supporting that one function. You know, unless you are, you know, sort of you are an internal communication person to be working purely on HR related programs. Generally, you're going to need to be identifying stakeholders across the piece and working with them. Sorry, that was a big splurge from me of just talking. Any comments on any of that? Where do you sit? I'm just going to stop sharing for a minute. I'm not going to go to anyone, but
I sit within the HR team. I sit within the HR team. So I've transitioned from talent acquisition into this engagement position. So I still sit within HR at the moment. Whether that's a long-term plan, I don't know. I hope so.
Yeah.
Because I think it's the right place to be for what we need to do.
And that makes sense if what they're wanting from you is to be working on the engagement piece and sort of, as I say, typically it's also the change piece. HR is a good place to be for that. Someone somewhere different.
I'm actually in an internal comms function. So all of those business areas you had on the slide sort of come to us, and we have business partners in our team who have a direct relationship, and then we sort of
smashing. Yeah.
Map that out.
So there's right the way across it. And where does internal communications report into then?
Good question. Like the strategy area, but more or less it's right under the CEO mainly.
That makes sense. So in a way, the strategy area, that would be a bit like when I reported to business planning. It was the same sort of thing, and it gives you a breadth, which is great if you've got business partners.
I think we've been lumped wherever they can put us historically.
But you know, I think it's always worth looking at where you are and thinking, oh, have they put us here for a purpose? You know, so if you've got if you are in marketing, then it is likely to be because the organization has got a really strong brand, and it's going to be, they really want people to be advocating for that brand. They want their people to be advocating for that brand. So that's probably why you are where you are. So it's just worth having a think when you talk about where you fit in the organization. You know, is it because the organization wants something really specific from me? But as I say, the getting good relationships across the organization is likely to be really important. And Jordan, sounds like you've got a structure that's really the optimum for that, because you've got people embedded in different parts of the business. Okay, we've got 10 minutes left. So what are we going to do with that final 10 minutes? Oops. So yeah, this was the final point, really. This is back to one of the papers I mentioned right at the start. Do you remember that? I said the stakeholder definition of internal communications, the academic that did that paper back in 2007. And one of the things that they were looking at is, well, what's the purpose of internal corporate communication? So they were saying that's sort of one of the 4 stakeholder angles. And the way that they describe it, and this paper comes from a PR perspective, so it's got a particular view, and you know, I think you could criticize it, you could critique it, but they said, well, all organizations live in a world where there's the external macro environment. So, you know, that's all those geopolitical and economic factors that we're all living within at the moment. Then we've got an external micro environment. So that might be things like, you know, if you're working in a competitive situation, who your competitors are. For someone like Callum, is Hinkley Point, is that, what's your relationship with the government, Callum? I'm realising I can't quite remember exactly what the relationship is these days. Are you in a competitive situation, or are you kind of, is the government one of your more important stakeholders?
Honest answer, way above my pay grade. I have no idea.
Fair enough. No, that is an honest answer, and it is absolutely fair enough. I shouldn't have put you on the spot. But the external micro environment is what's happening in the immediate environment that is going to be having an impact on your organization. And then, so that might be the competitors, or if you're part of the civil service, for example, then it would be things like, you know, sort of government and all the various different decisions that they make, and, you know, what party happens to be in power in your, you know, for your council at the moment, etc. And then we've got the organisation itself. And is that they say, well, part of the purpose of internal communication is to build an awareness of what's going on in that broader environment over and above the organisation, beyond the organisation's walls. Because if you build awareness, then actually when it comes to starting to make changes, people are more likely to understand. It's going to be easier to build that understanding of why changes are happening. And then if you do that, you're more likely to build commitment and a sense of belonging. Now, as I say, I think that's a rather oversimplistic way of describing the purpose of internal corporate communication, but it's certainly part of it. And one of the things that I will do when I'm auditing organisations is I look at, well, how is this organisation building an understanding of what's happening in the outside world? You know, what are the things that are affecting the organisation? Because I think that's a really important part of the internal communication mix to help. It's almost like business education for people about the business that they're in. And so for our last, I'm just going to ask for 2 or 3 examples of this, and then we'll broaden this out to any other questions that, you know, anyone might have about this, or this afternoon session as a whole. But before we have a general chat, yeah, how do you build understanding of what's happening out there in the big wide world beyond your organisation to help people understand, you know, the pressures on the organisation? Because as I say, I think that's an important role for us as practitioners.
Our CEO does communicate on the reported figures of our main competitors in the annual conference, and where we're aligned to that. And that's not something that goes out through my role at the moment, but probably will go through.
Yeah. And the more you can be telling, almost like turn that into a story rather than just the data, because people remember stories in a way they don't remember the data. You know, what is it?
Yeah.
What's the environment out there? What are our competitors up to? What are they doing? So what do we need to be thinking about? Brilliant. Any other examples?
I have one, but it's slightly different. Oh, sorry, did you want to go, Jazz?
There you go.
It was just because we're a financial services company, there's been changes to consumer duty, vulnerable customers, and there's a big thing coming in about pensions where customers should be able to access all their pensions, and we've got to be able to send certain data. The long and short of it is, so we do a lot of in webinars, we will communicate that in the CEO note, but also HR have got certain modules that are compulsory training as well that have been brought in for things like consumer duty, and it will vary on the amount of information you need based on your level of business.
But that's really helping people, understand. It's almost you're helping people understand the regulatory framework, why it's there, what they need to do, why it's important as well. Yeah, no, that's definitely in the helps keep the directors out of jail category as well, that one. Any others? One final example.
I was going to share, I had two different things actually. One was around kind of the mandatory training that obviously we have to do in financial services as well. But the other thing, which I think may help, is we do a bi-weekly trading update to all colleagues, which is optional, so they don't have to join, but actually we talk about our trading figures and actually the external factors that can affect trading for us. So kind of when people are looking at their car insurance, and actually even things like the weather can affect how people look at comparing their insurance and things like that. So that helps to kind of put colleagues front to understand.
And I think it's that's part of the strategic narrative, really, isn't it? It's helping people see where the organisation is fitting and stuff in that bigger world, and it is an important thing to think about. Okay, so we have 2 minutes left together, and I've covered everything that I wanted to. So any final questions from anyone? Okay. Fantastic.
I don't have a question. I was just going to say I found that really, like, this whole session has been really helpful, chatting to each other and like prompts that are relevant to the module. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yes, same from me.
That's fine. Yeah, I was going to say, has this helped in helping you feel a bit more confident as far as doing that first piece of the portfolio? Excellent. In that case, my job is definitely done. I'm pleased. So yeah, all that remains then is for me to say, well done. Congratulations. Thank you so much for all contributing as well, because this would have been a hopeless session if it had just been down to me talking. We wouldn't have got as much out of it at all. So thank you ever so much for that. I'm a moderator for the diploma, which means that I get to see just a sample of some of the assignments that you write. So I'll very much look forward to seeing some of, what comes out of the other end of this. And absolutely brilliant luck for what you're doing. Liz is a great facilitator for the program, and it really is a well-designed program. So I hope you get tons from it, and you will get out of it what you put into it as well. So carry on as you have this afternoon, because the contributions have been fantastic. Okay. Right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Liz.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.